Download, subscribe, and listen to Whiskey Hill Podcast. We're the new show that doesn't hold back on today's ridiculousness. We're not on the right and we're not on the left. We call it the way we see it, and we're going to make you laugh while doing it. Throw in some great craft beer and you cannot lose. Download Whiskey Hill Podcast anywhere you enjoy listening, and check out whiskeyhillpod.com for more.
What's going on, Salty Hippo Nation? It's your boy, the head advocate of the Big Titty Committee of 69 Whiskey.
Did somebody say titties?
And the undercover brother of the Bro Amigos podcast, Matt here. And it's time for my boys, B-Word and the Hater, to help you get sanitized. This is the Bleach Brothers Podcast.
You're never gonna make it, you're not good enough. There's a million other people with the same stuff. You really think you're different? Man, you must be kidding. Think you're gonna hit it, but you just don't get it. It's impossible, it's not probable, you're irresponsible. Too many obstacles, you gotta stop it, yo. You gotta take it slow, you can't be a pro. Don't waste your time no more. Who the fuck are you to tell me what to do? I don't give a damn if you say you disapprove. I'm gonna make my move, I'm gonna make it soon. And I'll do it cause it's what I wanna fucking do. Cause all these opinions and all these positions, they come in millions, they blocking your vision. But no, you can't listen, that shit is all fiction. Cause you hold the power as long as you're driven. There's no way that you make it, and maybe you can fake it, but you're never gonna make it. Aren't you just gonna take that? Make them take it all back.
Welcome into the Bleach Brothers Podcast. This is B-Word, and as usual, I am here with my tag team partner, Jakey the Baby. How are you, buddy?
Jakey the Baby.
Jake the Snake was taken.
I like that one. Tag me in, I guess. I don't know. I'm on the ropes.
Put me in, coach. Are you trying
put
to
me in, put it in me. Put it in me, coach.
Oh, all right, put it in me.
Put
coach.
it in me, coach.
we had a killer episode. I thought it was killer, at least, with Josh from Apple Boys last year, where we were talking about wrestling. And this year, actually just this week, I ended up watching Mankind Undertaker anniversary special that they had.
The Hell in the Cell, right?
The Hell in the Cell match, yeah. And they were actually walking through their thoughts and talking about the audience and, like, you know, all the nuances of the match that I thought were just really cool. And it made me think, we don't talk enough wrestling on here, but we're also pigeonholed in that because we don't watch wrestling today. Like, there are times that I'd like to, there are times that I really like to get into it. I just don't know where to start anymore, I guess. And then it's also a little different, dude. Like, we've talked about this, that we just have a hard time getting into wrestling. What's your reasoning that you think that we're having a hard time getting into wrestling?
There's a few. When I grew up, just being up front, like, I think things became more important to me. Like, I didn't need to follow I think it's one of those things that's hard because you always knew it was fake.
You always knew, but they never, like, disclosed it up until after our time.
No, but also nothing will ever compare to the Attitude Era for me. So it's like, that's the, you know, the best age I've ever had of wrestling. So it's like, it's hard to compete with that because it's never going to be the same. It's sort of like when I try to watch, like, X Games now, like, all the best tricks have been done, in my opinion. I don't know anybody in the sport anymore. And I don't skateboard anymore. I don't BMX ride anymore. I don't roto, like, you know what I mean? I'm not into that stuff. The other thing is it's very different in the sense, like, I remember when SmackDown and Raw was a thing, and now they draft them, and now there's so many different areas of it. Like, they have the NXT, and I think they have, then there's AEW, there's all these other brands, and it's not just like the wars that we had of WCW versus WWE. ECW is one of my favorites, but it's one of those over there. They all look too pretty too. And I understand there's people that don't, but, like, I felt like we didn't have, like, we grew up with both. We grew up with the really gimmicky characters, like the, oh yeah, and, you know, like Yokozuna, and, like, they really went for, like, if you're a barber or you're a, you know, a rocker, the dentist and stuff like that. But then we went to where there was still really good character building, I think. And I think now they just look like models that throw each other around. And I understand there could be character, because I'm not watching it. So people that watch it, that listen to us, you can hate on me for that. I get it. But when I look and I see a Randy Orton, and then I see him versus, I don't really know anybody else, but you know what I mean? Somebody else in there. It's like, okay, it looks like two ripped dudes at the beach that are just going to go and fake wrestle. And it's not the same as, like, when I saw Stone Cold versus The Rock, or Mankind versus Stone Cold. You know what I mean? There was a wide variety of different style of guys. And like I said, there are probably guys like that in there, but the faces of it all look the same to me. And I get you can say that back then they probably all looked the same too, but I didn't feel like they were. I felt like they had an actual identity.
Yeah. Well, and if you look at like prior to the Attitude Era, you're right. Like everybody had a job. You know what I mean? Like you had Brutus the Barber Beefcake, and you had
Ted DiBiase and the IRS guy, right?
Yeah, you had them. But God, what was his name? He was the police guy. The fuck was his name?
The Big Boss Man.
The Big Boss Man. Yeah,
love Big Boss Man.
So you had Big Boss Man. I mean, you had all these different personalities, right? The Undertaker was an Undertaker. Like that's where his gimmick came from, right? So it's something where everybody had this backstory, even though they were kind of just working with it, and they had to figure it out. Like Shawn Michaels was with Marty Jannetty, and they were the Rockers. They were like a rock band kind of thing. And you had Diesel at the time, who's Kevin Nash, and Diesel was like this trucker, right? Like everybody had a personality. Scott Hall was a Cuban guy. He was trying to be like
Razor Ramon.
Yeah, he was trying to be like Al Pacino from Scarface or something, and it just didn't work for him. But that was kind of his backstory. Like everybody had a backstory, right? And then we go into the Attitude Era. You really didn't care about people's backstories anymore. Like there were some of them like that were really good in a sense, like where you've got like Kane obviously comes in and he's got his story arc, and then you've got the Brood and that sort of stuff, but it just wasn't the same.
Well, they had the mixture though. So one, WCW sort of killed that because they went with the regular names. One, that was to get around contracts.
Yep.
Because you had people jumping ship and going over. So how do you get around it? You can't call Scott Hall Razor Ramon, so he goes and just becomes Scott Hall. And they made that cool. But the other thing is the WWE, or F as we called it back in the day, you know, they did the thing where they still did in the Attitude Era, like Kane and the Brood and those guys, but they made them more adult themed.
Yeah.
But they did a mix. They did, okay, you have Stone Cold Steve Austin, and then you have Kane. And it's like, so you got a mixture of stories, and you got a mixture of people of like, yeah, there's still the goofy, campy guy.
Right.
There's still the guy that's like in between there, like Undertaker. And then you have the normal guys over there, like Bret Hart. He's the hitman, but like, did you ever really think he was a real hitman? No, that was just a nickname.
No. And like Triple H was Hunter Hearst Helmsley. He was this British dude, right? And Triple H is not British. Like there were characters that had backstories, like Val Venus. We talked about Val Venus in our last episode. And Val Venus was a porn star, right? Gold Dust. They wanted Gold Dust to be, the word was androgynous, I think is what the word was basically where you just had male and female like characteristics. And they really wanted this person to be a guess to the audience. Like, is this a gay guy? Is this not a gay guy? Is this some guy trying to be female, like cross-dresser? Like there was this whole thing, right? And that was in a time where that wasn't really on television. You know what I mean? Right. And so sometimes they build the character that way, and it just, for us growing up, I think that mattered because we would get into those stories no matter how ridiculous it was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you know what was funny is, like, because we watch a lot of the biographies and stuff on it, you know, the documentaries, which was funny because you were saying you were watching the anniversary, and I was actually watching the biography of the Ultimate Warrior, because I never really was an Ultimate Warrior fan, but I love watching these documentaries on these guys. Just larger than life people, in my opinion, you know, and see how they get into their character and they sometimes become their character. Like Macho Man, I don't think knew how to separate between that. Hulk, I think Hulk Hogan just did it just for, you know, money. Right. But like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson knew how to separate himself from being The Rock and this and that. The funny thing is, though, when you watch a lot of these, Vince McMahon and the WWF sometimes for punishment would give people like a shitty character.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the best part is the people, some of the most iconic, best characters were the ones that they did as like either a punishment or a fuck you or a we'll just see what happens. Like Rikishi is a perfect example of somebody that they didn't think that would work and he made it work. Gold Dust is Dusty Rhodes' son, who's a fucking legend in wrestling forever. And mind you, I'm not into that really old school style of wrestling. It just wasn't my thing. I understand there are some matches from the 80s I enjoy, but like seeing that Dusty Rhodes' son is Gold Dust, and you're like, really? And he makes it work. Yeah. Like one of my favorite wrestlers of all time was Doink, and I watched the Dark Side of the Ring of that episode, which was great. Which he had, I guess, the cool thing is you learn about him. They had great characters all around. But then you have people like Steve Austin, who was stunning or stellar Steve Austin in WCW, and it never went anywhere. And it was like, then he finally makes it to WWE and it works. And so it's things like that are cool to see. And it is interesting because to me, I wanted to get into this part is one, we're going to talk about the wrestling era, but I want to jump to this is what do you think's more important? Because we're talking about character development and how people are for a match, the story behind it or the actual match itself?
That's a great question because oftentimes, like when we were a kid, we didn't really care much about the matchup. We were looking more toward the ending, right? But unless maybe it had to do with like championship belts or like there was something on the line, right? But you deal with all of that. I think more or less there was the lead up to it. I think the lead up to it was something that was so fascinating for us. Like every Raw, every Saturday night, whatever it was called back in the day, you had the intro matches, and we all knew that the intro matches were the jobbers. They were all the people that were just kind of doing their thing. They were opening up all this sort of stuff. And for us, we knew that the greatest matches were going to be at the end of the show. And as we're switching back and forth between Raw and Nitro, we're talking about, okay, what's going to happen with this character? What's going to happen with this character? What's going to happen with DX? What's going to happen with NWO? Like, who are the feuds? So for me, man, I think that was one of the things that like thrived for me. It was like a novella or a soap opera in a sense where you're trying to figure out like who's doing what with who and why this is causing so much drama. And like that was wrestling for us. Like we all knew, I think deep down, that wrestling was fake, but it was the lead up to it. Like when you're dealing with Bret Hart and a feud between Shawn Michaels, or when you're dealing with The Undertaker and all of a sudden his brother comes out of nowhere with Kane, or you're looking at, just the conflicts between Mankind and Undertaker, or when Rocky Maivia at the time, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, when he was with the Nation of Domination, you're looking at all these different things, man, and they all just like kind of melded. And there was always this type of risque or racism or some sort of storyline that just kind of helped further along this feud. And I think for me, I was more into that. But what about you?
See, I think, and I hate cop-out answers, but I think a little bit of both. And there's a few reasons for that. One, when we were kids, I think the reason wrestling was so big for us too is it grew with us in the same way, not just like the Attitude Era and we were becoming older and we were into tits now. All of a sudden we want the divas and shit like that. But the thing is, like, all they used to really do, and I could be wrong, but back like in the 80s and stuff, they mainly did just cut promos, right? They would cut like, I'm going to talk about you, you're going to talk about me. Maybe you might get hit with a chair and sneak into a thing, but there wasn't as much soap opera drama behind it.
Right.
And the way WWE is smart is as we were growing up, we were seeing more backstage stuff. And hey, they're having, these people are together and, oh, this guy's a racist. And all these little nuances were happening. Because the funny thing was, when I was a kid, I was more interested in the matches.
Right.
I wanted to see them wrestle. And then when I got older, I wanted to just see the outcome. I wanted to see the wrestling. I wanted to see the outcome. I wanted to see the belt exchange. I wanted to see who came in, how it went, the finishing moves and stuff. But it didn't matter to me as much about what was happening in the ring as what was on the outside. But right. I will say this, the other final point on that is it depended on who was wrestling too.
Yeah.
Because there were people that I loved seeing in the ring, like Scott Steiner before he became Big Papa Pump was one of my favorite wrestlers because he was so technical savvy.
Yeah.
It was great to watch. But then you had like Hulk Hogan, no offense, one of the most boring wrestlers I've ever watched.
Well, I shouldn't say sloppy with Hulk Hogan. He was just clunky. But yeah, I do agree with that. Like, I think we have to acknowledge how terrestrial wrestling was back in the day. Like you had the Southwest, like everything was almost in conferences, right? Like the WWF actually started to buy some of these things and like, cherry pick some characters from that, which kind of created this monster into which it is today. But I would agree with you. I mean, if you're looking at like a Juventud Guerrera versus Rey Mysterio, like I was all about the performance in the ring. Like I could kind of care less about all that sort of stuff. If we're looking at Dean Malenko versus Chris Benoit or Chris Jericho, like I'd be absolutely about that technical sound stuff, right? If you're looking at Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart as an example, like that's a technically sound match, right? But if you're looking at like Bill Goldberg versus Hulk Hogan, like it's just going to be sloppy. It's just big men slapping each other in the ring. And that's that's where it is different, because for me, like I said, if we're talking about, Eddie Guerrero versus Rey Mysterio as an example, the drama doesn't really matter to me because I know that they're going to perform in the ring. But if we're talking about, Kevin Nash versus Bill Goldberg as an example, the drama makes it like edible for me, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like, it's so digestible in that manner. In today's world, it seems like it's more about the drama or the backstory or whatever else, just because I think we've conditioned ourselves into thinking that, and we've conditioned ourselves as fans into like rooting for somebody. And then you still have the drop off when they become a babyface or when they become a heel or whatever else. Right. And that kind of works that way. What do you think though, Jake, makes a good wrestling character? So like, think about some of the greatest characters that you've watched introduced into the wrestling. What about them like completely either shocked you or completely sold you?
I guess I'd put it this way: is one, you got to shoot a good promo. You got to be good live. Two, you got to have a good gimmick or a character or something that I believe in. And it's not that I need you to be like Mankind and be off the wall. Because one of my favorite storylines ever was Kane, where he was the Undertaker's brother, and he came back and Paul Bearer was on his side. And that I thought that was one of the greatest storytellings ever. In the WWE, in my opinion. But what makes a good character is, and I alluded to this earlier in the episode, is them believing they're the character. So I watch a show on, I think it's Stars. It's called Heels. And if you haven't, check it out. It's a wrestling show, drama, and it's essentially written like from the territory aspect you were talking about, where a son like takes over from his two brothers take over the wrestling that his federation that their dad owned, and it's like in a small little podunk town, and they're trying to make it successful, but how like one brother is a heel and he has to act like it all the time in the town to make all the kids in the town hate him and think he's the bad guy that he portrays up on the stage. And the funny thing is, like, he's actually a really good guy. And so you're watching this guy have to deal with like the mental fortitude to be like, I have to be an asshole in public, but in real life I hate it. But right. I think that's what makes a good character is I don't want them to go full bore like the Ultimate Warrior, where they change their name to Warrior and they believe in the fakeism that they are, like right. the myth. But I want you to believe in your product. Like, I want right. you to sell it to me that you are like the best guy. I think the other thing though too, the final point is the crowd. Because we've seen it before where somebody was meant to be a heel or a babyface and they can't get booed or they can't get cheered or vice versa, right? They're cheering the bad guy and you're like, how is this happening? Like the NWO is a perfect example of that, where the bad guys are finally winning and everybody's like, well, that's flipped on its head. I think that's what makes a good character is you just make the crowd believe in whatever the hell you're doing. Right. And a lot of these guys are great at it. Like The Rock's my favorite wrestler of all time. Like, and I just love, because he cut the best promos, I think, ever in the history, the way he could talk on the mic and just have fun and his slogans and all that. It just, I believed. And the thing was, it's not even that big of a gimmick. It's just, it is what it is. You just go out there and talk shit and then wrestle you. And I loved that.
I would say that yeah, I think the promos and all of those are huge. I think for me, having a good valet also helps too. Like Ted DiBiase as a valet, he was great at introducing people like IRS or even Steve Austin when he came in, because Steve Austin, I forget what his name was when he first came in the WWF, but $1 Million Man was his valet, and that became a thing that way. Also looking at different sort of stables, like if you can come in and instantly be a part of a stable, like I realize that this is a bad example, but 1-2-3 Kid, when he was a part of both NWO and right. he's also a part of D-Generation X. I think that if you have that fluidity where you're able to just kind of take on a storyline or adapt to a storyline, like that's really good. Also, just the ability to have some sort of something that sets you apart. It doesn't necessarily need to be like Christian Bale's voice out of, The Dark Knight. But if you can either do like some sort of costume style, or even a lot of times just your music, like if your music is badass, like a lot of times that's going to set the tone, right? So if you're able right. to kind of do that. And then lastly, I think it's very important to kind of pick what style of character you are, because you can be a Hulk Hogan, right? Where you say, hey, work out, do your vitamins, say your prayers, or, whatever that was. And you can be a Bret the Hitman Hart where you're going up to all the kids and you're putting the sunglasses on them. But you also have the ability to be a Stone Cold Steve Austin where you just give zero fucks. However, you also have to pick your timing too, because who are you going against in the ring, and what's their perception to the crowd? What's their story arc like? And if you're picking a battle, or if you're assigned a battle through management, are you set to be a jobber, or are you set to actually like have some charisma and get out there? And I think oftentimes you're looking at characters that have a hard time getting that stuff. Like Mick Foley, as an example. Mick Foley was Dude Love and he was Cactus Jack all before Mankind. And the funny part about that is like the Mankind character was like this throwaway thing, but I think his promos were so fucking good that you just didn't know who he was. And like there was that mysteriousness about it, and like the whole like, is this guy insane? And like, what are you trying to do, right? But then you also look at the Undertaker. The Undertaker was just this weird character, but I think Paul Bearer actually helped him to become who he was. And so I do think that there is a good thing to say about a valet. But that's kind of like, if I were to create a character right now, dude, like I would really have to sit down and say, what exactly is the story arc that I'm looking for? Because I'll go back to Goldust real quick. Like they had no clue what to do with Goldust, like absolutely no clue whatsoever. And Dustin Runnels, who's Dusty Rhodes' son, he really had to force that character into a lot of things. And one of the things that I found out about Goldust prior to his character just kind of going off a cliff is that Dustin Runnels was actually willing to go and get breast implants. Like he was willing to go and just make this a transvestite character and just go off that weird tangent that would have been just wow at the time. And the WWE or F or whatever it was at the time said no, that they didn't want to do that. But, you're thinking about that, wrestlers are pushed to the point. They're already wrestling a lot of times, especially if you're a big character within the promotion, 300 days a year. And then you go on you have to do all the crowd work and everything else. It's just a lot, man. It's just an absolute lot. I really don't think it's a hit and miss thing. I think that there has to be a touch of luck to it.
Well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk about making a character.
Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's Josh with the Apple Boys podcast. My friends Corey, Rob, and Jimmy used to meet up with me after we all got off work on Saturday nights at our local Applebee's to hang out, drink Miller Lite pitchers, and swap stories. We talk about our days at work, stories about our families or our childhoods, funny things we saw on the internet, sports, current events, and whatever else came up. Sometimes serious, often irreverent, definitely not safe for work, and almost always hilarious. We decided to start recording our conversations and sharing them with the world. Since Saturdays are for the boys, and we hung out at Applebee's, the name Apple Boys Podcast made a lot of sense. Come hang out with us at the virtual bar and join our community. Visit us at www.appleboys.us or search for the Apple Boys Podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Happy tonight!
Bleach Bros Podcast is proud to align itself with Jerky Pro, a beef jerky manufacturer established by military and paramilitary veterans.
Available in 3-ounce or 1-pound bags with great flavors such as honey glazed, teriyaki, red hot, apple cinnamon, original, peppered, sweet barbecue, and if you're ballsy enough, nuclear.
Be sure to use our promo code to get some of the best jerky on the market. Use Bleach Bros 5, all lowercase, to take advantage of this offer today.
Welcome back into the Bleach Brothers podcast. We're talking wrestling. B-word. Before best announcer duo, JR and Jerry the King Lawler. Do you agree?
I'm thinking Gorilla Monsoon and Vince McMahon.
Oh God, no, totally wrong.
I think Gorilla Monsoon was a good one. Although I will tell you, Jerry Lawler surprised me as being an announcer, because he was like this weird wrestler, right? Like he was King Lawler, and he had that battle with Latka from Taxi. What the hell's his name?
I don't know, but I know, yeah.
And like there was this whole thing about his character and stuff. He actually turned out to be a really good announcer. Like you hear about those like players, right? Or like those coaches who have a career in a sport and all of a sudden they like end up being just like this great announcer. Like John Madden as an example. Like John Madden's a Super Bowl winning coach. He ends up coming back and arguably he could be in the Hall of Fame just for his announcer career and the whole works. But I think that Jerry the King Lawler really made a name for himself in that. I guess talking that out, Jerry the King Lawler has to be in that best announcer.
And I loved good old JR. I loved JR the way because I think they bounced off. It's like our dynamic sort of like, I would be Lawler out of us. I'm the guy who always goes for the bad guys, talk about the girls, just being obnoxious and a weird, annoying voice. And you're like, all right, I'm going to bring the ship back. I'm going to actually talk about the match. And then, what the hell is he doing? Like, I love when you get so mad.
I'm going to be the fat sidekick with a half paralyzed face and loves barbecue. Yes. I love it. I love
There's nothing wrong with that. All right. So there's your character. There's your wrestler. you're the stroking stroking smoker.
It's palsy. It's palsy. I'm the palsy. I'm the palsy stroker. Palsy stroker? No, palsy smoker. Let's get our words
smoker.
correct.
I like that. I like palsy smokers.
So I know we've thought about this, and this is one of the things that I wanted to bring up in this show. I don't know if you did anything like this, but there used to be a wrestling magazine called Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Probably still is a magazine to this day, but I actually used to subscribe to it back in the day. And there's a couple points that I want to make before we actually get into the topic. I didn't know certain things about certain characters like Scott Hall or Jerry the King Lawler. When they were juiced up, dude, they were massive fucking humans.
They're big men.
Like
giant.
Massive fucking humans. And like you look at Scott Hall as Razor Ramon, and like initially he was kind of big, but then obviously that all kind of tapered off. But when he first got into like actually wrestling, he was a massive fucking human, and he had this afro and he had a mustache. And I didn't believe it was him. Like I'm looking at a picture of him, I'm like, there's no way that this is Scott Hall. And sure enough, underneath the picture, it says Scott Hall pictured on the left or wherever it was. And Jerry the King Lawler, same thing, dude. Like Jerry the King Lawler was a big fucking dude. He was just built like a Mack truck. And sometimes you think about these guys and like their stories kind of have to match their physique, right? Like they're not going to be this high flyer as a big old fucking moose. So you have to kind of pick it. So back to Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the very back of the magazine was an address that you can actually send in your creative character. And there was a numerical system that you got to choose, like it was 1 through 4, 1 through 5 on how you're going to build your character. And then you would draw your character and you would send it in, and then your character would then compete with other characters. I think you had to send $5 in or whatever it was. And my character got fucking trounced. But I thought my character was pretty cool because it kind of looked like, Big Van Vader. And it kind of looked also like Bam Bam Bigelow. Okay. And it performed like Juventud Guerrera. And then it had the personality of Sting. And like it was like this massive fucking meld of like it would have never worked, right?
Right.
So speaking of creating a character, like I want to hear from you because I have some thoughts on what my character would be. What would your character be if you were to create a character? Whether it be your build, whatever it might be, you're going to create a character for the WWE. It's going to perform in the WWE, not AEW, not any other promotion. We're not talking ICP fucking one. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Juggalo Wrestling.
Juggalo Wrestling. Yeah. It's not ECW. Like WWE. What's your character like? Like, give me the bio on your character.
Now, all right. So I'll preface with this. I used to play a lot of video games, right? Nintendo 64, especially. Mm-hmm. And I remember I had a lot of the WWE games, and you can create your own wrestler. Mm-hmm. And I always made a big guy. I wanted to be the big guy like Diesel. I wanted to just come in and choke slam or power bomb and just be that guy. Like I was more there, the imposing force. And I wasn't huge in high school, and I'm not huge now, but I'm a tall guy, right?
Right.
So I always wanted that. If I could now, I would do it two ways. I would either just be myself, right? Because you can just take your name and I'm ripped and I'm Jake and I'm just out there and I'm going to have my attitude and I am the hater. I'm the hater. I talk good on the mic. I could keep myself intact and be out there and just be a total blatant asshole. Now, mind you, I will say this. I would be a heel. I think I would be an amazing heel. I could just sit there and just go off on people and have a lot of fun. But if I had to do the gimmick route, I'm going to be the dad. And I want to come out with like the fanny pack, the Fila's, like, a riding lawnmower to the ring, like the typical, my promos are me like grilling in the backyard with my family. And, somebody comes in and hits me with a chair. Like I want to be the dad. And that's all I want to do. I want to have the dad bod. I want to not have to work out that much. I want to be the full-blown, just regular, straight, white American male that just grills hot dogs on the weekend, mows my lawn, drinks 3 Coors Light, and tries to get in the ring on Saturday. That's what I want. That's what I do, B-word.
I don't really know how to respond to that, actually. Yeah, I don't know.
You were expecting something totally different, weren't you?
I was thinking like, you're going to end up being like a very tall blue meanie. You're going to end up doing like, something stupid, weird. Like you're going to be like Owen Hart from the rafters and you're just going to drop, but instead you don't drop. You just don't die. Yeah. I don't know, man. Like my favorite wrestler I think of all time is Sting. And I like Sting after he became emo Sting. Like once he was like influenced from the Crow. Yeah. And so for me, I would like to be a darker character in a sense where I want it to be more mysterious. I want it to be more, theatrical, if you will. And I just don't know where I would go with that. Like, so I'm going to scrap all of that and I'm going to take it. I'm going to go like this and I'm going to say, I'm going to come out kind of like Butterbean. And I'm going to have this boxing character, and I'm going to be this big old fat motherfucker in the ring. But we're going to call me Charmin. And the reason why we're going to call me Charmin is because I'm going to be Hater's toilet paper. And that's what this. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I going back to the creative character thing. I think for me, like one of the I think the most underrated wrestlers was Jim the Anvil Neidhart.
Yeah, I agree.
He had that big goatee that came down, and I've always been envious of growing a goatee like that. If I could grow a goatee like that, I totally would. But I like the fact that he was just a wrestler. He was kind of like the everyman wrestler, if you will. Mm-hmm. He wore he
wore a singlet.
Yeah, and it was just very simple. And I think I appreciated that quite a bit actually because there wasn't much to like try on that. I think if it were me, I would just want to be this blue collar wrestler that comes out. Almost in the same breath as like you were talking about like Scott Steiner, almost like Kurt Angle, where you just kind of come out and you just perform. I think that there's a lot to say that you're not doing anything fancy. You're not trying to stand out. You're not trying to be too much. And you just come out and perform. And I think the thing that I would focus on a lot would be my promos. And I would try to take on every feud that I could and then just show it off in the ring. Like that's really what I think I would do.
I like that. Were you a bigger fan of tag teams or single wrestlers though?
Single wrestlers. I mean, I like tag teams, but single wrestlers was where it was at for me.
See, I think it's because I had a brother though too.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we were close in age and we watched wrestling a lot together and we would wrestle. Like, my brother was in high school wrestling, but like we would have friends over, as you remember, and be on the trampoline and we'd make our own matches and have fun. Yeah. And I think that was part of it. Like I loved tag teams. And I could rank tag teams higher than actual wrestlers, I think, because I enjoyed the camaraderie. I enjoyed the story arc of them. I liked it, when they broke up, stayed together. And I felt like during our era, too, there were so many good fucking tag teams. I mean, we had the Dudleys. We had the Hardy Boys. We had Edge and Christian of the Brood. I mean, we even had, like, I remember, like, what was it? There was the Bushwhackers were one of my favorite, like, weird groups. Yeah. Too Cool. Like, there was a ton of fucking groups. And
Hawk and Animal.
Then you'd see the power. Yeah, Hawk and Animal from the Legion of Doom. But like then you finally got to see Undertaker and Kane when they got together. I thought that was awesome.
That was so bad. That was so badass. Was that Brothers of Destruction? Is that what they were called?
I think so. And then there was the Rock Sock connection was fucking great.
Oh god, that was a good
where
one. Where
Mankind and the Rock went together. And that was one of the best story arc acts out too, where the Rock got betrayed Mankind and he just sat on there and let him get beat up in the ring. But I want to ask you this final one and we can move on. But what was the name of your stupid character from the back of that magazine?
I don't remember, to be honest with you. I really don't. And honestly, it just might have been my name, just because when I would look at the rankings, like I needed to know who it was, and I think I just wrote down my name, that way I could just try to identify like where I came out. I don't know what my name would be. Honestly, it would probably just be my name or some version of my name. It might even just be B Word.
So if we were a tag team, would we just be B-Word and Hater of the Bleach Bros, or do you imagine something else for us? Because I have an idea. I just wanted to ask you.
Honestly, I think I would go with the Bleach Bros, or I would go with the hateful something. I would try to figure something out to do with hateful. But I think for us, just our backstory, our tag team arcs, I think I would go with Bleach Bros. But what's your thought process there?
See, I would try to get really ripped, okay, for this. And the reason is because I would want to be called the Perfect 10.
Oh, okay.
And the reason is because we've joked that me and you are a 10, right? I'm a 1 and you're a 0.
Yeah.
But our story arc is you get all the women, and we're convinced that you're like the super hot one.
That's
and like
so
you're
funny.
like you're only in shorts, like you're just letting it all hang out all the time, and I'm like in the singlet and like not happy with who I am. And like, I'm the mentally unstable basket case over there, like just an emo boy, like down on myself. But I'm tall, ripped, and ready, and like you're the 0. And it's like, but you're the actual hero of the fucking group. That's what I want to be. The perfect
That's
10 of
fantastic.
B-Word and Jake.
That's fantastic because that's almost like Bizarre and Eminem. Like they're walking down and Bizarre gets all the women. Yeah, that would be really fun. What would your idea of our, assuming we were a tag team, what would your idea of our intro music?
I would do rap metal. Because it would be like something like Hollywood Undead or something like that, where it's like you get your like old school rap style and I get my like heavy music. Maybe even like if we could convince, because we're at that level, right? Remember when like Jay-Z and Linkin Park did it out together?
Yeah,
like something like that for us, where it's like the mix of both worlds. Like I see that type of mashup.
So sadly, because I was thinking in the same vein, but I wasn't going with Jay-Z and Linkin Park. I was thinking more along the lines of Limp Bizkit. Or like Korn and Limp Bizkit, where you just have that new metal, like, age type stuff there. What would your finishing move be?
The carpet buster. No. Finishing on the carpet all day. I don't know. That's a good question.
It depends on your character, because if you're the grill master character, I think you'd almost
have to do,
you've got to do the crop duster.
That's like, not a bad one.
I don't know what it would be, but the crop duster would be its title.
The crop duster would be good. As the hater, I don't know. I'd have to. I
think the hater would almost have to be a submission.
Yeah, like, and it would be like the report to HR, like sort of type move, like just like something that's you know what I mean, or I don't know. I can't come up with a name of it. Like the name's gonna be crappy, but I would be a submissive guy, because my favorite move of all time, seriously, was Bret Hart's
Sharpshooter.
6-star shooter, right? The sharpshooter.
Yeah, I
loved that move, and I actually did that in a fight in 6th grade once.
That's funny.
And everybody made fun of me. They're like, "What are you doing?" And the kid is screaming though, and I feel like I'm winning, but I realize like nobody does that in real life.
Yeah, the figure 4 leg lock would be a cool one, and you could do something with that too. I think for me, I would have to do like a suplex. I think some form of a suplex is what I would have to do, and I don't know what. I don't know what it would be like. I don't know if it would be like a Goldberg suplex, just where I like hold him up for a while and like slam him down, or something. I just don't see myself as a technician when it comes into submissions.
See, I love big guys on the top rope. I want to see you splashing on somebody like when Vader would try to.
Okay.
I want to see you like full blown, like, like, and we call it like, like what are like competition jumping, where it's the perfect 10, like, you know what I mean? Where I hold up a sign after you jump on them.
Or like I'm on the top rope and you like grab me from the top rope and like suplex me onto somebody. It's called the perfect 10. Yeah, like that would be delicious. The one thing that like I think is really funny, but it could work with a fat guy like me, is there when I went to midget wrestling several years ago, there's a wrestler named Meatball, and his finishing move was he would put his wrestling or his competition on the bottom turnbuckle, and he would pull his pants down, which would reveal him wearing a thong. He just wipe his ass all over their face. I think that would be something that would be pretty cool. Like maybe not a finishing move, but like a solid sort of signature like move.
Yeah, like when Rikishi would do the butt in the face.
Yeah.
See, I would have one like that called the cream pie. Where I would do the cream pie where it's just full like nuts in the face. You know what
That's funny. We could call it the wobble, because that's exactly what happened to me with Jesse Wobble in fucking high school. He fucking put that engorged nut right on my forehead and I couldn't move. It was terrible. It was fucking terrible. So we've talked about our interest in wrestling. We've also talked about storylines versus execution, what makes good wrestling characters, and also if we were a tag team character. Let's get into this, man. There's been a lot of different belts that have taken place all throughout different promotions, different federations, all this sort of stuff. I'm opinionated when it comes to belts, because I think that the belt needs to look a certain way. But I know that you have certain qualities of a belt that you appreciate too, right? So what are those for you?
So yeah, I'm going to treat this like everlasting segment, and essentially, right, where it's like listenability, like all those rules, right? So one is look. I think look's the biggest thing, but
Right.
two is who held it. I think that's important. Like what's the level of the belt?
Okay.
But three is what it took to get that belt, or like the matches behind it, if that makes sense. So like one of them, I'm going to give a spoiler. I won't tell you where it's at, but the hardcore belt is one of my favorite belts of all time, because the style of matches that it took to win that belt were hardcore matches, right? Like weapons and like no tap and stuff like that. And so that was the final like aspect of like what it took to win that belt. So with that, we have top five. I'll let you start. What is number 5 belts like it's your favorite belt?
Number 5 to me is the WWE Intercontinental Championship, specifically between the 80s and 90s. That white belt, the white belt that had all the gold on it, had the black banners, all that sort of stuff. I always thought it was slick. And here's the thing about the Intercontinental Championship that I think is different than, let's say, the Cruiserweight Championship in WCW, because we always assumed that the Intercontinental Championship was like a secondary championship, if you will, to the heavyweight championship, right? And I think that they introduced initially the Intercontinental Championship for smaller wrestlers like Shawn Michaels, like the 1-2-3 Kid. And while that's good there, I think that the Intercontinental Championship is one of those things that they have taken and they've made it into a nice prize for those people like a Chris Jericho, for those people like that. And I think that the probably one of the best people to have the Intercontinental Championship in my memory was Stone Cold. I remember when Stone Cold got the Intercontinental Championship and he was still contending for the WWE, or F at the time, Heavyweight Championship. And I really, really wanted him to be able to graduate from that belt, but I just love the belt. So for me, that's number 5.
I would agree. I like that, but mine is actually a newer belt, even though I don't watch it.
Okay.
And it's the NWA US Championship belt for the WWE.
Okay.
It's got Bald Eagle Freedom Party written all fucking over it. It just looks nice. Like, I like the simplicity of belts. I hate when they get too like crazy out there. Like, for example, like John Cena, when certain champions get to design their belt, when he did the spinner belt. And I get it. Like, that was the thing and that was his style and it was cool. But I just love the look of this belt. Like, this belt looks like a clean belt, and it explains its championship. It explains you're the U.S. championship. It looks like a U.S. champion, like, you know what I mean? So I love that. I like the Intercontinental belt. The funny thing was, growing up, that was my favorite. I don't know why. I always ranked that higher. I loved Intercontinental matches. I thought that was the coolest belt. I liked that was, like, you know, the coloration behind it. It wasn't as gaudy. But for number 4, even though I just mentioned somebody designing their own belt, the Brock Lesnar championship belt out of all champions that have won a belt is my favorite. And I think it's because it's very, it seems like it pays more homage to the belt itself than the character.
Right.
Because, like, you look at The Rock's and it's got the bull. You look at Stone Cold's, it's got the skull, right? It's got the broken skull. John Cena's, as I already mentioned. Brock Lesnar's belt is very to the point of Brock Lesnar looks like a championship belt. It's clean. I like it. And I like things that pay homage to the original. So that's my number 4. What's yours?
My number 4 is that, and this is not something that I've watched either, but it's the NXT Championship belt. I love that big X in the middle. I like how it's got the N and the T on the opposite side of it. It's got the WWE logo on the top, and it's also got the 2 little placards, if you will, the WWE logos on the side. I just think that it looks cool. I don't know who has it. I don't know who's been able to have it, but I do like the look of it. And it's one of those that I think can kind of fall into like a Cruiserweight Championship belt, kind of fall into the Intercontinental Championship belt, where NXT is this, you know, territorial competition that's kind of a feeder for the WWE. But I think the look of it's just legit with that big ass X. And I don't know why, but that's my number 4.
Number 3 for me is the Divas belt.
That's a good belt.
And it's very fitting for the women. It's good looking. It's just one of those belts. I also like whoever it goes around. I have really rarely ever been disappointed with a diva getting something put around her waist, because I love all the divas. I even love Chyna when we did the AI build of a woman, I wanted some China parts on that woman.
Yeah.
So I am a huge fan of the Divas. I love what they've done with them. I like how they started as valets and they have become more. But yeah, it is my number 3 belt. I think it is very well designed. It is very well thought out. Yes, it's very feminine. And it's the thing. The WWE doesn't shy away that they're strong women, but they still treat them like women. And that's something I fucking enjoy. Like, we're not hiding from that, if that makes sense. Not trying to get, like, 2 down one road. But that's just my fucking opinion there.
We've talked about some tag teams, right? Edge and Christian, the Dudley Boys, the Hardy Boys. Let me tell you about those tag team belts, dude, from the 80s up to the 2000s, the WWE.
2002, yeah. It was like 85 to 2002.
Yeah, those were slick, dude. Those were like pure silver looking, almost like a chrome. They had the eagle up on top. It was very prominent. Like, you knew what those belts were going into it. Like, there was no question about what the belt was. And I think oftentimes, like WWE, especially after WCW, like they bought WCW, there were so many goddamn belts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you knew exactly what these belts were. And I think that made a lot of sense. And these original belts that from the 1980s to the 2000s, these ones were fucking slick, dude. And I really enjoy those. There's been a lot of shoulders, a lot of hips that these things have rested on. And they're just a really, really good looking belt.
I wholeheartedly agree. The funny thing was, I love tag teams so much, but I couldn't put any of their belts on my list. At some point, the ECW ones, the WWE ones, the WCWs, they all look the same to me. And they keep them for so long. It's one of the only belts I feel like when you look at the list, like we said, that was like 85 to 2002. And then they did 2002 to like, I don't know how long, maybe it was 2018 or 2010, but something like that. They keep that belt forever. It is funny that we're listing all these old belts because if you look at the new ones, they almost look like toys. And I don't think I enjoy it. Not the old ones aren't toys, but they looked like a championship boxing belt or something that you would want to win and wear. And when I saw the WWE had like that red belt with their WWE logo, and then they had a blue one, I was like, it just looked tacky.
Yeah.
It looked like something at a kid's party, nothing honorable. But my next one I've already given away, it's the hardcore belt. I always loved this belt because it's broken. The matches that went behind it was taped together. I liked what it represented, but I also thought it was a cool play on taking a belt, shattering it, and then still using it. Like, you know what? Yeah, this is going to be a thing. Like, we're going to take a belt, we're going to give it to a champion, and the champion's going to be proud to wear this broken trash can piece of shit.
Yep.
And I've just always enjoyed that belt. Like I said, I enjoyed the matches more behind it because the wrestlers that wrestled that style were always my favorite.
Right.
But it's a cool fucking belt.
I've mentioned this one already. The cruiserweight belt out of WCW. You talk about like the Juventud Guerreras, the Ravens, the Eddie Guerreros, the Rey Mysterios, Psychosis. A lot of those little guys that wouldn't qualify for the heavyweight championship. I do kind of like how the WCW separated the weight class, if you will, between cruiserweight and heavyweight belts. That's something that you didn't really see in the WCW or in the WWF at the time. But this one, why I like this one is because of how they tried to expose the WCW logo on the sides of it. They've got bright red letters surrounded by a bunch of gold, right? And the best part about it is you get that very prominent WCW logo up on the top, but it's surrounded by gold, so you just can't really even see it. But then you've got cruiserweight just right on the front of it. And this belt's been around many wrestlers, and it's one of the ones that I just always appreciated because, as we talked about, is it the storyline or is it the wrestling? I felt like the true wrestlers within the WCW were fighting for this belt. They weren't fighting for the heavyweight belt. The heavyweight belt oftentimes had the NWO logo on it, and nobody really cared when it came to that. But the cruiserweight belt was one of those ones that all those little guys can compete for, and it was one of the ones that just looked the best on those guys. So that's where I'm going with that one.
So number one is from one of the wrestling federations. I'll say that I never really watched. As we know, I've mentioned on the show before, I'm not really a big WCW guy. I know the biographies. I've watched matches in the past. I've watched a few things. I liked the wrestlers from it, but I was always a WWE guy or an ECW guy. But the WCW big gold belt that Goldberg had is my favorite belt of all time. And it was really hard because I was looking at it going, I like the original WWE belt from like when Hulk Hogan had it in the 90s. I thought it was a decent belt, but the look of that belt looks like the pure grade championship belt. And it might have also been who had it. I mean, when Goldberg wore it, it just looked fitting. It looked like a belt he should have.
Right.
And I've always thought that was the coolest looking belt out of all of wrestling. I thought it was a great design. I thought, I mean, the name makes sense. It's big gold, but it is just clean. It exemplifies exactly what a champion is.
You and I agree on our number one belt. That WCW belt was fantastic. It was huge, right? Like I just talked about the Cruiserweight Championship. The Cruiserweight was a much smaller than this one. But this one on Big Show before he was Big Show, the giant shoulder. This one on Hulk Hogan's waist. This one on Sting. This one on Diamond Dallas Page, Nature Boy Ric Flair. It was always so big and so gold. It looked like it was heavier than fuck, right? Like this thing looks like it was like 50 pounds. But they're just throwing it around, holding it up, and it's you know, the sides of the belt are limp. You can tell that it's actual leather. Like there were just things about this belt that I just truly loved. And the WCW World Heavyweight Championship belt, big gold, is my number one for sure.
It's a great fucking belt.
It's a great belt, dude. Absolute great
so
belt.
Let's get into the final part. The top 5 matches of all time. Now, I will say this, B-Word. This was my hardest topic because I watched matches, and sometimes they mattered, sometimes they didn't. There are matches that stuck in my head. Of course, they make the top 5. But I don't know. It just wasn't the easiest thing for me. But I'll let you start.
This one was tough. This one was really tough. And so the way that I rank these is basically on nostalgia, but also the meaning behind the match. And the way that the match was looked at in history are some of the qualifications that I did with this. So for number 5, the one for me was Shawn Michaels versus Ric Flair in Ric Flair's final match. And the one that the thing about this match that just meant the world to me, knowing the backstory of it, Ric Flair's family, his kids, his wife, they were all in the stands. Like this was his goodbye match, right? And the way that Shawn Michaels looks at him in the final part of the match, and you've got Ric Flair just on his knees and he's crying and he's just like, come on, like I can do this. And Shawn Michaels looks right at him and he mouths the words, I love you. And then he goes up and he gives him the showstopper. And he ends the match right there. He ends up kissing him and hugging him right afterward. You can legitimately tell from Shawn Michaels that whether this was a ploy or not, like he truly respected Ric Flair, and the meaning of this, regardless of the backstory of it, was so much more for Shawn Michaels and for Ric Flair, being able to say goodbye in this crowd, being able to have your family in the stands to do it. For me, I don't know that is going to make like the most technical match, right? I don't know that it's going to make the highest flying match. But for me, all of that backstory and all of that substance that goes into the match, I fucking love it. So for me, that's number 5.
I feel you. See, I almost put a Shawn Michaels match on my list.
You don't have one Shawn Michaels match?
I don't. And I love Shawn Michaels. He's one of my favorite because I was going to put the Montreal Screwjob just because I totally like it's one of the greatest stories. But then I realized the story is bigger than the match. And I love Sweet Chin Music. I liked him in DX. I love Shawn Michaels. I loved him against Tatanka in WrestleMania 9 when he was, coming out. And I couldn't do it though. But number 5 for me is one of the oldest matches, or it's probably the oldest match on the list. And it's Macho Man Randy Savage versus Ricky Steamboat from WrestleMania 3.
Really?
I used to be that kid that would go rent the videos.
Yeah.
I remember, primarily I would do this when I'd go visit my grandparents' cabin because they only had a VCR and there was really, you'd play outside and then if it was too hot, you'd come inside because it's Arizona, right? And I would watch wrestling video. I'd rent them, at Blockbuster or whatever. And I remember the 2 most memorable ones was WrestleMania 3. And then I don't remember which WrestleMania it was with Hulk Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior. It might be the same WrestleMania. I don't know. But I always hated Ultimate Warrior and I hated that he beat him. But when Macho Man and Ricky Steamboat stole the show. That was one of the most technical matches I've ever seen in my life, and seeing somebody who wrestled, because Macho Man could fucking wrestle.
Yeah, he was
that
good.
guy was great. So that's my number 5. I'm going to jump into my number 4 because it has 2 of my favorite wrestlers on the list, and I think it's one of the most iconic wrestling matches. And it was Bret Hart versus Steve Austin from Survivor Series 1996.
You just stole mine. Okay, so I want to hear why that's on yours, and then I'll tell you why that's on mine.
I mean, just even the bleeding moment where WWE didn't like that, and Stone Cold's like crying out in pain. He's getting the sharpshooter, and they're doing all that. But I mean, it was a change of the guard type moment.
Yeah.
It was also the heels could be great and they can also be bad. Like, you know what I mean? Everything, the good guy could be bad. It was like everything you wanted in a storyline in a match. Yeah. And you got to see Bret Hart actually like be Bret Hart, the famous Hart Foundation family, like wrestling style, and go all out, and then see somebody else who's so big or going to be so big come out as well. So it's just a fucking amazing match.
See, that's a great match because, you already mentioned a couple things. Like it was a submission match, so you couldn't pin anybody. Behind the scenes, they had talked about the sharpshooter and trying to do so. Stone Cold never actually like tapped. He never gave up. He just passed out, which I think is huge in that. But you're right, that was a change of the guard. You had a babyface in Bret Hart coming into the ring, and then you had a heel in Stone Cold Steve Austin coming into the ring. And by the end of that, they had swapped roles entirely. And for that reason, that makes my number 4 on my top 5 because of the way that that's looked at in history. Like Bret Hart had not been a heel up to that point. He'd always been a babyface. But Stone Cold, I feel like that match actually launched Stone Cold into who Stone Cold became.
I think actually the King of the Ring did, especially when he said, the Austin 316 line.
Yes, but I'm talking about as far as a face goes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your number 3?
So number 3, I already mentioned it at the beginning of the show. It was King of the Ring, Undertaker versus Mankind. It was the Hell in a Cell match. Now, here's the thing. I think that from watchability, that it's a better match if you look at the year before, I believe it was, with the Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. I just think it was a better technical match. But the Undertaker versus Mankind in this Hell in a Cell match, when the Undertaker just like threw him down on the fucking table, and Mankind's not getting up for what felt like forever. You don't know if he died, and all of a sudden the medical team is like taking him away, but they have to lift the cell to actually like let the medical team bring him. So the Undertaker's still on the top of the cell, and then they bring that back down, and then you've got crazy ass Mankind, Mick Foley. He's like, fuck this, I'm going back up, and he goes all the way back up, and then like the craziest fucking match, dude. And I think if there's people who want to say that wrestling's fake, like, yes, the storylines are fake, but if you want to say wrestling's fake, like, there's some legitimate bumps that those guys took in that match, and it a feat of athleticism. So that's mine.
I hate you tonight because that is my number 3. And we are for once and we say for once, but it is pretty rare that we have the same fucking things in the same fucking order.
Right.
Because I agree with you. It is one of the most iconic in the sense of just watching Undertaker throw him. I mean, literally throw him. I mean, even when you watch the documentary Beyond the Mat, and Mick Foley talks about it in his book, which is also a great book, by the way, about how compelling this match was, how it hurt, and how his wife was worried, and there was so much behind this, and it's one of those, if you do like a reel of all matches of all time, it's always going to be on there.
Yeah,
it's number 3 for me as well. Number 2 is probably one of the most technical, awesome, high-flying extravaganza matches of all times, and that was the table, ladders, and chairs between the Dudleys, Edge and Christian, and the Hardy Boys.
That almost made my list.
And just because the Dudleys were known for tables, and the Hardys were known for ladders, and Edge and Christian were known for a little bit of both, and even just the story when they talk about like how are they going to end it, and they are all sitting in the ring, because one thing, I don't know if people that don't know a lot about wrestling, is they get to sort of write their own innings, and they turn it in, and then it gets approved. And I don't remember who was on the side, but he was sitting in the crowd. Somebody like Mark Henry or something. And they were like, how are we going to end this? He goes, why doesn't somebody just like fucking Edge spear him off the ladder while he's trying to get the belt? And it was like an awesome moment. But because I was always a huge Dudleys fan. I just always was. I loved the 3D drop. I loved that Bubba Ray and Devon, right? Yeah. And how they were brothers. But I loved all those tag teams, and it's just one of the coolest, longest pay-per-view matches ever, and it's amazing.
The match that I'm going to reference is actually Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, but it's not the Montreal Screwjob. It's the Iron Man match where they're wrestling for an hour long. I think it ended up being like an hour and 2 minutes or whatever it was. And just think about how much you're having to like use energy, like how tired these people would be at the end of it, right? And they were technically sound. That's the one thing that I will say about Bret Hart and also Shawn Michaels, is they were so technically sound, and it was such a great fucking match to watch because you didn't know how it was gonna end. You didn't know who was gonna win. It wasn't necessarily the battle that the Montreal Screwjob was, but it was such just a technical fucking match where it was these two wrestlers just putting it all out there, and it was done so very well. And for that's gonna make my number 2. So what's your number 1, man?
People are going to hate me for this, but I don't fucking care. Because for me, this is the most memorable match of all time.
If you take
one of my
mine,
favorite wrestlers.
If you fucking take mine.
It's not. No. It's Doink versus
Jesus
Crush.
Christ. Jesus
in
Christ.
WrestleMania 9. Fuck you. In WrestleMania 9 at Caesar's Palace, when Doink pulled the fake arm out and beat Crush over the head, and then the second Doink came out from underneath the ring and they did the mirror thing. I love that match. I, as a kid, was so flabbergasted when that happened. I loved Doink. I loved Crush. I loved seeing everything happen in that match. And here's the thing, B-Word. I remember everything about that. I remember Crush when he did the head crush thing and the crowd's cheering, and Doink comes out and he's making everybody cry, and he's beating him over the head with his fake arm, and there's somebody under the ring. It is so memorable and awesome. Fuck you.
I like the match. I just don't know that it would be in my top 5.
It's number 1.
I struggled, man. I struggled because there were some epic battles between Kane and The Undertaker. There were some epic battles between the NWO that were really good. Also, there was a lot of DX and stuff. But I think when you get into DX and NWO, there's also a lot of cheating, right? So you're also talking about that. The one that's most memorable for me, and that's the reason why it's number 1, it's most memorable for me, was Hulk Hogan trying to pick up The Undertaker, or trying to pick up Andre the Giant and body slam him. And that's why I thought you were going to take it. When you were saying it's the stupidest one, people are going to hate you. I feel like people are going to hate me for that one. But there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot that goes into it. Hulk Hogan actually ripped both of his biceps in trying to lift Andre the Giant. He actually also ripped a muscle in his back, and I want to say ripped part of his pec. Like it was not for him to actually pick up Andre the Giant and actually throw him down. He had injuries, and back then you couldn't not have injuries, right? Because that was still pretty early on in Hulk's career, where he still had to go on, and he still had to, I think it was for the championship belt, if I remember, he still had to defend the belt. So for him having to go through those things, and you start talking about that, it almost reminds me of like, and this is later on, but like Lex Luger trying to body slam Yokozuna. Just that epic amount of weight and just this muscular dude being able to do it. For me, that was one of my very first memories when it came into wrestling. That's the reason why it's number 1. For only that, was it a technical match? Was it a high-flying match? No. Was it something that I didn't think could happen that actually happened? Abso-fucking-lutely. And so that's why that's my number 1.
And you make fun of mine.
I didn't make fun of yours. I just don't know that I wouldn't put yours in the top 5.
Doink.
So we last week, for those of you who are listening and might have skipped episodes or whatever, last week we put out a free taste for our 2 Patreon shows, Hippo Happy Hour and the Stain Remover. If you haven't listened to those, please do. Let us know what you think. And if it's something that you like, go ahead and support us on Patreon. We always love the support. We want to thank our current Patreon members and obviously everybody who's listening to our stuff, sharing our stuff, commenting, interacting with us. It's great. Make sure to check us out, bleachbros.com. And with that, Jake, what do you got for us?
Thanks for all the dirty talk. Come back and get sanitized.
And maybe you can fake it, but you're never gonna make it. Are you just gonna take that? Make them take it all back. Don't tell me you believe that. Are you just gonna take that? Or will you fucking fight back?